Hello everyone, I'm super excited to be back with another video. I'm recording this at night this time, so I apologize if the video quality is a little bit worse or if the board is a little bit more difficult to read. I'm going to take all the questions from the board and drop them in the comments of the video too, just in case you can't see it on the board as well. Today we're going to be talking about planning your story. Now this is something of an optional step. If you are doing this as a 1 or 2 day course instead of over several days or several weeks, then feel free to skip this. But if you're doing this, especially over a couple weeks, in installments as you work through this with your parent or teacher, then I highly recommend not skipping this step, because this can, first of all, help you have a direction, kind of like a roadmap for where to go when you do your story, and because it's going to give you practice for a really important step in writing called outlining. Outlining writing projects is something that you are going to be doing for a lot of your life, whether it's writing papers in school or writing papers in college, or whether you grow up like me to become a professional novelist and have to plan your books before you start them. Now, I will confess something. I never used to plan my books before. When I was a newer writer, I never planned them at all. I just would sit down and I would see where it took me. And that is a perfectly fine way to write. The only problem is that sometimes, especially if you're not used to writing books like that, or especially if you haven't studied things like the 3 parts of stories like we're doing in this workshop, when you sit down to write without planning first, there are a couple things that can happen. For one thing, it's really easy to get stuck in your story. A lot of the time when people are experiencing writer's block, it's because they don't know what happens next in the story. And if you have a story plan, then you can turn to your story plan to help you see what happens next. Another thing that can happen is that sometimes, at least for me, the stories don't always make as much sense if you don't plan them out first. And so when we have a story plan here, we can make sure that all these important parts of stories are going to happen in our book, and we can make sure that it makes a lot of sense. And I know for me, when I plan my stories out first, I often have to do less revision and changing at the end, because sort of planning out your story is a little bit like pre-writing it. So, like I said, this is an optional step, but if you have time and if you're doing this course over a couple of days or weeks, I highly recommend taking 10 or so minutes to get a plan for your story down. Now, the way that you plan your story is completely dependent on your comfort level with writing. When I do this step with younger children, I'll often have them just draw pictures. When I do it with older children, I'll have them write a list or write a few paragraphs for each segment. You can do it however you feel comfortable. And if you are very young and would like to have your parent or teacher or whoever you're working on this course with to write it down for you, then that is also completely fine. The important thing is just to get a plan for your story down one way or another. So, making a story plan is really easy. And another thing that's good about making a story plan is it's a little bit like practicing for writing the big story. And if you write something down in your story plan and you decide you don't like it, that's okay. It's just your story plan. It's really easy to change. And it takes less time than writing your story, and so it's not quite so hard to make changes because you haven't dedicated quite as much time to writing your story plan as you will to writing your story later on. So, the first thing, I've divided this again into the 3 parts of stories, beginning, middle, and end, and I have a bunch of questions that I want you to write about in your story plan. Now, like I said, if you just want to draw pictures for your story plan, that's okay, as long as you know what those pictures mean. So in the beginning, the things that we need to know are: who is the story about? What does this person want, the main character, and where does the story take place? So when it comes to who is it about, I'll often have people write or draw pictures of the main character and any other major characters there are. Going back to our story sequencing video, in Moana, the main character is Moana, and the other major characters that play a really big role are Maui, Grandma Tala, and I would say Moana's parents, and Heihei the chicken, and maybe Pua the pig, and Te Kā, probably. So those are the major characters of Moana. There's other characters, but they don't really play a direct role in the story. when you write, what do they want? What does if you could sit your main character down and say, what is it that you want to get by the end of this story? What would they tell you? Can you write or draw a picture of that to show you that's what's going to propel the action of the story forward? That's what's going to get the story started. The last thing is, where does it take place? Like we talked about in one of the previous videos, the setting is really important in your story, because if your story takes place on an erupting volcano, it's going to be really different than if your story takes place in somebody's living room. For the middle, the things that you need to write down in your story plan are, what is the problem that's keeping your main character from getting the thing they want or their goal? What are they going to try to fix it? There can be one answer to this question, or like we talked about in previous videos, there can be multiple answers to this question, because a lot of the time characters will try many things before they finally find the one that works. And on that note, once you've said what the main character tries to fix it, does it work? If it doesn't work, what happens instead? What are they going to try after that plan doesn't work and after something happens instead? So the middle is usually the longest part of your story, and it is really important because that's when your main character is really trying all the things that they can to solve their problem. In the end, you want to know, how is the problem solved? What is the thing that they try? It's the last thing that they try. What is the thing that finally fixes the problem for them? And then what happens after the problem's fixed? What happens to all the characters in the book? What happens to the main character? What happens to any helper characters who are there? What happens to the bad guy if there's a bad guy? And like we talked about, I haven't written this on the board, but like we talked about in several of the other videos, is your ending going to be funny, happy, or sad? Because knowing if your ending is going to be funny, happy, or sad is going to help you decide what should happen to all the different characters in it. Now, once you have this story plan in place, congratulations! You have a roadmap that is going to help you be able to really easily write an amazing story, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next video. Thanks for watching.